farming. We have 19 acres. But before that, we, obviously we both have a drive to be more or less as self-sufficient as possible. So there was a lot of kind of what we called homesteading in the suburbs. This was my house in Schwartz, and he started it. We lived in the same neighborhood, and all of a sudden the whole front yards of like 4 or 5 houses around us were gardens. Because it was like, why are we growing grass? We don't need grass, we need food. So we were doing a lot of things while we were in the city, and I always try to kind of make that point to people, is to start where you are, building the skills that you need. You don't have to have a big farm, you don't have to have a big property. You can buy, quality vegetables and learn to pressure can and be able to have long-term food preservation of healthy food that you know where it came from and what's been done. So we always try to just like drive that home with people. Like, you don't have to have a farm. You do not. You just start where you are with what you have and build the skills that are practical for where you're at. Identify the deficiencies and move forward and never stop learning. So I always just kind of throw that in there. So we finally, it's a very long story, but we made the leap. We bought the property and got going a little over 2 years ago. And so we started kind of small. We had chickens in the suburbs also. We both had, I think probably the most we had was me at 15 or 20, kind of when we were living in Schwartz. But when we got to the property, it was, well, let's start with chickens, and then I think bees were the next thing, and then we got some pigs, and I really wasn't planning on a milk cow. Now, I had been researching milk cows, for probably 10 years. I knew it was like the eventual kind of pinnacle of what I wanted to be able to do with home dairy and all of that stuff. But I was expecting it to be like, maybe just now we would be starting to shop for a milk cow. Well, this guy over here, no, absolutely not. He's like, let's do it, we're ready, let's go for it. So he shakes his head no, but he really did. So we pulled the trigger and we got our first cow in September of 2023, about 6 months after we moved up there. And so we got Paula. A lot of y'all have actually met Paula. She is the queen of the farm. I knew what we needed. I have an 8-year-old son, and so priority number 1 was a cow that was gentle, that was trained to a halter, had kind of been there, done that. Those are really hard to find. Really, really hard to find. So we ended up getting her from a woman in Texas, and she was a heifer, so she'd never had a baby, but she was pregnant, and she was due in December. So she's never been through a lactation before. We don't know how much milk she's gonna make. All we knew was that originally she had come from a commercial dairy, which is very, very common. And, so it was kind of a crapshoot as far as, what are we gonna get when this goes? But her temperament, perfection. It's like, okay, well, we can take a chance on some of these other things because she is definitely the right cow to learn on in terms of ease of temperament and all of that stuff. Well, we only got her because cows are much happier in pairs, at least. But we were like, well, we got her in September. She'll calve in December. She'll have the baby. It'll be fine. It'll be good. We can rock her on for 3 months or so, and then we'll have a companion for her and the baby. Well, the baby was stillborn. So then it was like, well, what do we do? And next thing you know, we're getting 8 gallons of milk a day from this sweet little heifer. That she has been bred to just milk her little heart out, and that's exactly what she was doing. And so then at that point, we're getting 8 gallons of milk a day, and it's like, what do we do? We have chickens, we have pigs, but they can't do this. We both work full time still, so it's like we can't be home every day making cheese and butter and product. We don't have the fridge space. I mean, our fridge holds what, like, I don't know, 10 gallons maybe. Of milk, so we were just in completely over our heads. But at that point, we were still so new and so fresh from the world of wanting access to raw milk that we were like, okay, we have a surplus of milk. How can we make it available? Well, it was not legal at that point, and we weren't wanting to do these under the table, like meet you in the back parking lot and swap some jars or whatever kind of deals. And so there is a group called the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. And so we joined them for a farm membership. I think it's about $125 a year or something like that. But you get access to attorneys. And basically the only loophole in Louisiana Louisiana law at that point was this thing called a herd share. And so with that herd share, essentially people would buy a share of your cow, and then as a part owner, you're then entitled to milk, and you reimburse on a per gallon basis, basically for feed, boarding, maintenance, things like that. So we worked with these attorneys and we got our contracts drawn up, in like March, I think, March or so of last year. And then we started, I think I put the word out with Dana, and I mean, we were full within, I don't know, 4 or 5 days. Laura was one of our first, if not our first, actual member of the herd share. You know, it's like, it happened so fast. I mean, we didn't really know anybody. We weren't like pushing it out there. We weren't doing anything like that. So we rocked on, and I think at Paula's peak, when she was still making 6 or 8 gallons a day, we had around 15 families that one cow was supplying a week's worth of milk every single week. And she rocked on. She's still, to this day, she's still producing about 3 gallons a day. And she's not been bred back yet, and that's been because of another multitude of reasons. One of the things that we dealt with, and this is where I could just go down into the rabbit hole in the weeds, but because she is more commercially bred, she struggled a lot with how we needed to feed her at a homestead scale, with access to proper feed, to grain, to things like that, to be able to support her production. Because with these commercially bred girls, they're gonna milk regardless, and they'll milk themselves into skin and bones. And so we really struggled kind of keeping her weight up the first couple of months, and then she doesn't like the summer heat. She came from Texas, but she doesn't like Louisiana heat. She's a fussy you know what. But she's the queen of the farm, and she knows it. So anyway, we rock on with the herd share, and then Louisiana legalizes the sale of raw milk for pet consumption, because that's what we're talking about tonight, right? Pet consumption, pet milk. Exactly, and products. And so at first, we weren't planning to change anything about the herd share. I mean, it was working really well. We had families on board. I enjoyed kind of getting the relationship with people, this one-to-one kind of relationship, knowing the names of the kids who are drinking Paula's milk and things like that. But as it rocked on and we realized that, or I realized, and he'd been telling me for a long time, that with working full-time and all of that, my mental bandwidth was just not at a point where we could even begin to think about milking more cows. And not so much because of the actual milking itself, but because of the dealing with people and the coordinating and the figuring out, oh, this person's on vacation this week, so they don't need milk, and this person has family coming into town, and they asked for more milk this week, and here's this, and oh, Paula's got a light case of mastitis in this one quarter, so we're not gonna save milk from that quarter, you know, and so all of these just kind of logistical things were mounting up, and it was like, we can't expand based on the current model. Well, then Dana's like, I want to sell your milk in my store. And I was like, oh, really? And at first I was just kind of like, oh, you know, no, that would never work, and it's too complicated, this is that. Then we started talking about it, we were like, this might actually work. So that's where we are today. So we shifted from the herd share model to selling it here in the store in December. I think about the first week of December is kind of when we started that. And you know, there's been a few things. We definitely had to iron out some kinks as far as jar returns and figuring out how to track things and this and that, because one thing that I feel strongly about is keeping our milk in glass jars. You know, just for a multitude of reasons, but primarily you're reducing waste. It tastes better out of a glass jar if you're concerned about microplastics, you know, things like that. Also, you can't skim cream out of a gallon jug. You have to pour it into something else and let the cream rise again and all of that. So that was honestly the biggest unknown for us when we started was the jars. Like, are people going to return jars? Are we going to be able to maintain this? And so far, I've just been blown away. I mean, we've only lost just a few jars each week. So thank y'all. Thank y'all so much, those of you that are getting our milk. So that's kind of the backstory as far as how we got to where we are today, the very condensed, very, very condensed version. So everybody's here tonight because you want to learn about raw milk. So why raw milk? And this is probably going to be a lot of repetition for y'all. You know, obviously you know the benefits, you're interested in the benefits. But we have a joke, and Dana actually does our sales log. I'm sorry, I have a hair on my toe, and it keeps itching my foot. Guess I'm shedding. But we laugh because we all really hate the term raw milk, because it just carries such a negative connotation. You know, as we think about raw meat, you're going to get sick, or, you know, unless you eat rare steaks. But, you know, it's raw seafood. Oh, you know, you can get sick off raw oysters, you know, things like that. So we call it real milk instead of raw milk. But it's because it's exactly what it is. It is unpasteurized. It's non-homogenized. The stuff you go and get from the grocery store has been both, most of the time, ultra high temp pasteurized and homogenized, which basically means that they've broken down all the molecules and fats and everything in it and made it so it just all blends together. It is straight from the cow. Essentially, there is no processing other than pouring and filtering that happens in between milking from the cow and going to your refrigerator. But here's the benefits, and here's why we're so passionate about it. It's easier to digest, especially if you're quote unquote lactose intolerant. Most people can actually drink raw milk. Even if you have issues with store-bought milk, now we recommend, like, don't go jumping in there and drinking a half gallon in a day. You know, take it a little slow, but you can do a lot more. Like, he has issues with store-bought dairy from pasteurized and ultra pasteurized things, and for the most part, there's no issues at all with raw dairy products with him. It's more nutritionally complete and unaltered. Makes sense. You're not breaking it down. You're not basically blasting it into oblivion and then reconstituting it into a drinkable product. And it has beneficial bacteria. So this was a chart that I stole from the Raw Milk Institute. They have a really good website for anybody that's interested in raw milk, and that's also one of the places that you can go to kind of find raw milk. They do keep a list of farms. Now, I don't know, just because a farm is listed on the raw milk, I think, page doesn't necessarily, well, the raw milk page, I think, is like they go through a certification process, but there are some other fine raw milk pages and things like that basically the farm like pays or requests to get their name on the list. It's not necessarily that they've like passed any inspections or anything like that. But they have a really, really good website with a lot of information, and they actually, I reference them down here too, because they have links to all the peer-reviewed studies that show kind of the benefits of raw milk. And a lot of the peer-reviewed studies on raw milk actually come out of Europe. There's not a lot of studies being done in the United States on raw milk. Shocker, I know. I think we all can probably come up with a few hypotheses about why that is, but it has been proven that consumption of raw milk is linked to lower rates of asthma, allergies, eczema, ear infections, fevers and illness, respiratory infections, things like that. And I know that I can say, just with my 8-year-old, I mean, he's the healthiest 8-year-old I know. Like, he may get sick twice a year, and it's generally with some stomach bug that's going around, and, you know, he bounces right back in 24 hours or so. We noticed a big difference just in terms of overall immune system health when we switched to raw dairy. And I've heard several of our customers say that as well, that they've seen a big difference in their kids, especially with this flu season, you know, and everything else that's going around. But what I do see kind of get floated out there a lot, especially on kind of some of the crunchy groups and the homesteading groups and, you know, groups that I identify with, so don't come at me. But, you know, there's this kind of feeling that, well, it's raw milk. It's not dangerous. It's good. That's how we're supposed to drink milk. Wrong. I will be the first to say raw milk can be dangerous. And I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that it's not. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and fearmonger either, but y'all need to be aware, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of people that think that because it's kind of the trendy thing right now, oh, well, we can just go buy some raw milk and it'll be fine, it'll be good. So, raw milk, and this is kind of the breakdown, and you're much more up on the science than I am, so please jump in if I miss anything. But basically, raw milk has lactose, which is the milk sugars that are basically in it. And it's warm when you collect it. Obviously, it's coming out of your cow at 96, 100 degrees, something like that. And it's warm at collection, so that makes a perfect breeding ground for bacteria. You have a warm area, you have sugar, you have plenty of stuff for it to feed on. Do we need some more chairs? We got this one right here. How are y'all? But so basically, when you're milking a cow, you have a perfect breeding ground for bacteria, both good and bad. So that's where the sanitation of your equipment, the sanitation of whatever vessel you're putting your milk into, that's another reason that we're really passionate about sticking with glass, because we can sanitize glass so much more easily. And like the plastic jugs, we would have to figure out how to store them somewhere, and then I don't even know what you do for a plastic jug to sanitize beforehand, or if they come. Anyway, that's one of the things that we like about glass, is just that we have a lot more confidence in kind of the sanitation. And every jar that gets returned here, no matter how clean, it gets re-washed by hand. Right now, we're getting a dishwasher eventually, but every surface gets scrubbed when it gets back home. But anything that is unsanitary basically becomes that breeding ground. So a lot of the lactobacillus, different bacteria, lactobacillus, that is in raw milk are the beneficial ones. They're the ones that are good for your gut. They're the ones that people sell in probiotics, things they're in yogurts, all these things. But and they're there, and they help fight off invaders and eat lactose, which is essentially like what makes your body able to digest the raw milk better. It has all these different enzymes, all of these different proteins, amino acids, all these things work together in raw milk to make it into this very digestible product for you. But again, there's over 168 species of lactobacillus. Just lactobacillus. Not even talking about all the other kinds of bacteria that are present in milk. And unfortunately, this can also be a perfect breeding ground for the bad pathogens. Now, most of the time, the harmful pathogens are not coming from your actual cow. Now, there is a chance that if she has mastitis or certain strains of mastitis or things like that some of those could come from her, but for the most part, typically, it comes from your hands, it comes from your equipment, it comes from whatever is coming into contact with that milk. It comes from the air. Things like that. Whatever is coming into contact with your milk before it gets jarred and chilled to that 40-degree temperature. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. One of the things that I hear a lot is, well, my grandpa grew up drinking raw milk and he was just fine. I guarantee your grandpa had a very different immune system than we have today, with all the toxins that we're exposed to on a daily basis, everything coming through our food, the air, everything else. He was also eating like that for his entire life. He had built up immunity and tolerances and ability to handle kind of these real foods and things like that. So that's one of those kind of pet peeves for me, and I apologize that y'all got my little soapbox for it, but it's not all raw milk is created equal, and just be very, very careful. And we'll get into a little bit more about that here in a second with how to actually pick a producer and what to look for and questions to ask and things like that. You got a chair. So here's another myth. One of the questions that we get a lot is, are your cows grass-fed? And why not? Yes, in a perfect world, you would be able to find 100% grass-fed milk. This world is far from perfect. These dairy cows in this day and time have been bred for so many generations to milk based on grain. And it's already a shock to their system when you're taking them from a background of kind of a more commercial dairy to like a homestead type situation with whatever feeds you can get from your local feed store, get milled or things like that. So yes, there are grass-fed dairies, but most of those dairies have been breeding for that for generations upon generations, and they have, can you go back one more? And they have the land and the ability, and they're making the investment in their pastures to be able to do it, because grass-fed is really only half the story. A dairy cow cannot survive on grass alone. What they actually need is a varied diet with forbs that are basically broadleaf plants that are higher in protein. They need, sometimes they'll even eat young bushes and things like that. Now they're not a goat, don't get me wrong, but the varied diet is so important. And so these farms that are successfully 100% grass feeding their cows for milk production are investing heavily in their pastures. They're planting additional living forages. They're rotating their cows very, very often. They're really managing for diversity rather than just a monoculture of grass. And so they, I kind of liken it to like a high performance athlete. There are high performance athletes who can survive on a vegetarian diet, but they have to find these super high quality sources of protein to be able to metabolize into what they need. Dairy cows are the same way. Metabolically, they aren't even on the same planet as a beef cow. Beef cows have been bred for generations to basically metabolize feed into muscle, and dairy cows have been bred to metabolize feed into milk. And these commercial girls will do it at the expense of their body condition. They're gonna milk how much they're gonna milk, and it doesn't matter. They'll be a rack of skin and bones. And so what we see a lot in the homestead community and on these cow pages and things like that is people who have been sold or who have bought into this grass-fed is best kind of lie, and their cows are literally starving. I mean, you see cows that are in horrible shape, and the people have good intentions because, I mean, it's a cow. It's supposed to be able to survive on grass, right? No, not at all. And so that's kind of another one of my soapboxes that y'all have now been privy to. It's kind of this myth about, oh, well, I have to have grass-fed milk. Like, yes, it would be better. Absolutely, 100%. We're in the process of choosing very carefully the bulls for our next generation to be able to reduce the need for as much grain in the future in our cows. We will never get to that grass-fed point, completely grass-fed, just with the current acreage that we have. And I think we have the figures and stuff, but he's been investing heavily in managing the pastures, going back and planting things, overseeding, things like that. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there also, because that's one that we get a lot is, are your cows grass fed? It's like, oh yeah, they're fed grass. They're on grass 24/7 other than when they come in the barn to milk, and then they get grain. So it is kind of possible to have those. The other one that I hear a lot is A2A2. Now, A2A2, basically, we'll go over what is it first. So that is in reference to your beta-casein proteins that are in the milk. There's basically three major kinds of protein that make up your milk. Your beta-caseins, your kappa-caseins, and then your beta-lactoglobulins, and all of that. But this beta-casein, there's basically two options. There's A1 and there's A2. Those are the two types of protein. So now we're gonna go back, for some of us longer than others, but way back to high school, Genetics 101. So a calf gets a copy of that protein from each parent. And so they have two copies of this protein. So they can get an A1, like we have one cow that's A1, A2. So her baby could have either that A1 protein or that A2 protein. So it's very easy to breed for A2 in the future if you start out with an A1, A2 cow. But, and I'm sorry, tell me if I lose y'all. But the A2A2 protein has been shown absolutely to be easier to digest. It definitely has health benefits, but unless you are one of a teeny tiny subset of the population, you're not going to notice a difference simply by going raw. So let that sink in for a second. For like 98%, I just threw that number out there. There's nothing scientifically backing that, but just based on what I've seen and read and all of that, the A2A2 does not make a difference. I'm not saying it's not important. That's another trait that we're selecting for. All of our cows are A2A2 except for one. She's A1A2, and the reason that we went with her is because she's actually she's from grass-fed genetics, and so she takes a lot less grain. And for us, it's easier to breed for A2 in the future, and we would choose a cow that needs less grain, basically, over that milk protein is what I'm trying to say. So yes, if you have a choice, all things being equal, absolutely A2A2 all the way. but I just wanna make sure that people understand that for the vast majority of people, it actually doesn't mean a hill of beans. Just if you can drink raw, you're gonna be a step ahead. So, here's another myth. People go walking in with their, and they see a gallon of raw milk that's anywhere from $10 to $20 a gallon. And I'm like, man, that's crazy. And then they see on TV, well, a cow can milk 8 gallons a day, or they talk, a cow can milk 8 gallons. Y'all are getting rich, We hear that a lot. It's not true. I wish it was true. I wish it was true so much. I really do. But so we just kind of threw some numbers in there just so y'all have an idea. Right now, because the world is crazy and nuts, the average price for a milk cow, either a bred heifer or a cow that is already had a lactation or is in milk and is bred back, is $3,000 to $5,000. Closer to the 5. If she's halter broke, if she's gentle. I saw an ad for a cow the other night that they were like, you're not gonna milk her without a kick bar. She's the devil, but she's a good producer. She's never had mastitis. She's got 4 good quarters, and they were asking like $4,000 for this cow. And there was people commenting all day long, wanting information. It's a tough world out there right now, unless you have cows that you're breeding, which we hope to be able to eventually, have some cows that we can sell as well. Actually,
I have a question.
Go back just one more. Yes, ma'am.
Monthly milk testing, what is that?
Yes. So
I didn't know if you were gonna go there.
Yeah, he's jumping the gun on me.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So, and then we mentioned just kind of the grain issue. So the rule of thumb for a modern dairy cow is that for every 1 gallon of milk that they produce, they need 3 pounds of 16% protein grain. That's the general rule of thumb. Every cow is different. Paula needs more than that. Our other cow, Patty, needs less than that. She does good on it, but that is kind of the general rule. So for a cow that's milking 5 gallons a day, more or less, which is fairly high production for a homestead setting, that's 15 pounds of grain a day. It extrapolates out to $33 a week. Here's the hay, here's the because I do like to supplement a lot. They get kelp, they get minerals, they get black oil sunflower seeds, they get beet pulp, the ones that need a little bit more condition, things like that. Our cows are spoiled. So spoiled. It's ridiculous. I'll come back to the milk testing, but just general veterinary, that's kind of a ballpark figure. It just depends on kind of general overall health, things like that. How many vet visits? Paula's had a couple of vet visits because she wouldn't gain weight, so I needed blood work done, and I needed this done, and I needed that done. And then if you have a calf that she's gonna grow horns, you got to get her disbudded, and so that's a couple $100 investment, things like that. So that's kind of the ballpark of $750 a year, and that doesn't even cover then getting the cow pregnant again, because you have to kind of keep this cycle of calving in order for them to keep making milk. Most people in the dairy world are not keeping bulls. They're doing artificial insemination. So you're paying an artificial insemination tech to come out, and you're getting basically whatever semen is in the tank, and it's basically there's a visit fee, and then you have to pay for the actual semen itself, and if it takes a try or 2 or 3 or 4, it can be pretty costly. We went the other route, and I went full stupid and went to the class to be able to do it myself, and got all the equipment and all of that stuff, and I have no idea if I'll be successful or not, but I'm $2,500 in at this point, so it's like,
You'll be successful.
go big or go home, right?
Erin, can
Hopefully
I
not
add,
go home.
I
Yes.
noticed you didn't take into account either the cost of the land, the fencing,
Yes.
the water troughs, the stanchion, like none
The
of
therapy
that is
you
added.
need.
Yeah, the therapy you need after all of this. So
Yes.
it's much more, this is just very.
That's a really good point. Yeah. When we moved up there, we were living separately at the time, and we sold 2 houses, and so we burned through basically 2 houses worth of equity in
3 months.
like 3 months between building a barn, because the property was basically a blank slate, building a barn, doing fences, buying the cow, things like that, buying pigs, getting just kind of this setup. It was a lot, very fast. I don't recommend doing it the way that we did it, but here we are on the other side. I think mostly whole.
And we say thank you.
I was gonna say, you would.
Yes.
I enjoy it.
Your time up there is worth a lot too.
Yes, that's honestly the biggest thing. And so this monthly milk testing. So, one of the things that the Louisiana bill that legalized raw milk, originally, the original form was like 19 pages. And it had a lot of restrictions about how much milk you could sell a month, how you could only sell on farm, you had to maintain records for this and that, you had to test for this and that. And basically, from what I hear, it was kind of gathered to make it so hard for these small producers that people wouldn't do it. And there's a lot of theories about who was behind that, whether it was commercial dairy, Mike Strain, you know what, whatever. I don't know the ins and outs of that. But the final copy of the bill that went into law is only 3 pages. And the only requirement that it has for producers is that you get monthly salmonella testing. So if you are selling pet milk in the state of Louisiana, you are supposed to be sending your milk off every single month to an accredited lab to be tested for salmonella. We found a lab in Colorado, and that's who we use. And so the second Tuesday of every month, I am paying whatever FedEx has deemed the number for the day is to overnight my milk to Colorado to get tested for salmonella. So, and one of the reasons that we went with the lab that we did is because I can actually get a more full spectrum panel. Salmonella is the only one that's required by law, but when we send ours off, we also get E. coli, we get checked for coliforms, and we get what's called a standard plate count. And basically, that's a measurement of the sanitation of your equipment. And so it's not necessarily the health of your cow, though that can kind of roll into it, but it basically tells you how clean is your equipment, what's your bacterial growth, whatever, 48 hours or however long they culture it for. So the base price for sending it in on that second Tuesday and getting those 4 tests is $36. That's the check that I actually cut to the lab. And then it's whatever FedEx decides. Basically, we started off, it was like $27, and this last time I think it was $120. So it's a range based on, so I mean, that's almost a whole week's worth of milk sales sometimes that you have tied up just in testing. I would venture to say there's probably a lot of people selling raw milk that are not sending off for the testing because LDAF doesn't want to track it. You know, we called them, we were like, well, what kind of permit do we have to sell pet milk? What kind of this, what kind of that do we have to have? And they basically were like, we don't want to know. We don't want anything to do with this. There's nobody coming to us asking for those records. There's nobody coming to us asking for the salmonella testing. We're both science nerds and we like data, and we kind of feel that you can't do better if you don't know better. So we like to send our milk off anyway. We wouldn't have been able to do this before we were selling just because the price. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to come out of pocket with that for every single month. And this lab also, they do test for Campylobacter and Listeria as well, but those tests are so much more expensive. I mean, they're like $35 and $56 respectively, I think, a piece. So I only get that done quarterly. That was kind of my compromise with myself, was I'm not gonna get that done every single month. We'll do the basic 4 panel for $36, and then quarterly we'll get the Campylobacter and Listeria testing done as well. So that's kind of where we landed on that. Did that answer your question? Okay, perfect. All right, so how to find a producer if you're in the world of wanting raw milk. There's not that many of them, folks, and I'm so sorry. I wish that there was more, but it's just such a hard thing to do and to produce that it's not the kind of thing that people are just gonna go get a dairy cow and be like, all right, I'm selling raw milk. There's been people that tried it, and I always tell people, don't buy their milk. Do not buy their milk, because it's terrifying. So we currently have 2 cows in milk. I know that 3 Board has, I think, 5 in milk now. And then there's a couple other people that pop up on the Raw Milk of Louisiana pages. I know nothing about them. I can't say good or bad about them. I know that there's really not that many in North Louisiana that are selling right now. But should you find somebody who is, or if you just find somebody with a family milk cow, like you have a friend who has a milk cow, or a friend of a friend who has a milk cow, or things like that, here's kind of some things that you should ask or know or be able to get a good comfort level. I'll tell you right now, and I'm not saying this to brag at all, but after being a raw milk producer, there's a whole lot of things that we would wanna know before we bought milk from anybody else. Like if we couldn't have cows or our cows went dry or whatever, it's a lot. The more you know, it's kind of one of those the more you know situations. Ignorance is really bliss, for sure. But ask questions. You know, see if you can come visit. Some farmers don't like having people on their property, or they don't want the revolving door, and I totally understand. But they should at least be able to answer your questions kind of in a forthcoming way about, you know, how they milk. Do they hand milk? Do they machine milk? What's their cleaning process like? You know, we use a machine on our cows, and I have hand milked, and quite frankly, I don't think that I would ever sell milk that was hand milked, because I've seen the difference in the filter with what basically dirt, debris, things like that you get after hand milking versus what you get from a machine that's been in a closed system the entire time from udder to filter, essentially. I'm not saying that hand milking is bad. I've drank hand milked milk. I'm just saying, like, ask a lot of questions and make sure that people are really, you know, they should be able to describe their process in detail, especially with hand milking. Like Megan, I would trust. She can tell you her process in detail, everything that she does with milking and all of that. So, see if you can meet the cows. You know, that's one of the things that's so cool about dairy cows. They are so personable, especially compared to beef cows. I mean, these cows have been bred for generations to be literally 6 inches from humans, being milked. And so they've been bred to have these really beautiful temperaments. And I mean, there's some not so beautiful temperaments too. It's just like everything else. But for the most part, as a rule, dairy cows are just hilarious to be around. I kind of feel like they're more like goats. Like they're all up in your business. They're trouble. They're just
In your backyard.
in your backyard. We had a heifer in the backyard last night. Somehow she pushed a gate open, and then she proceeded to absolutely lose her mind and buck and run and jump and do all the things all around the backyard last night. So that was fun. Yeah, I kind of liken them to goats, just the personalities and things like that. They're a hoot. But you know, so you should be able to ask how they milk, how do they clean the machine if they are using a machine, how often do they do that, what's their process, do they, you know, kind of what we found. So our machine gets cleaned after every single milking, and by cleaned I mean it's run through a 3-part wash, rinse, sanitize system basically that we do. And then kind of the gold standard is you do that, and then once a week you do a full takedown where you take all the parts and pieces apart, you scrub absolutely every single inch. Well, our milk wasn't lasting as long as I felt like it should be lasting last summer. And so we added a second cleaning kind of midweek. And that seemed to fix the issue. And then our standard plate counts have been really, really good since we've been sending off for milk. This last month had actually gone up a little bit. I'm thinking it was because of the heat probably, and bacterial growth. So now I'm kind of rethinking, okay, well, what do I do after I clean the machine? Do I need to actually take the pieces apart so that it can dry, so that it can, you know, what do we need to do it? Things like that. Anyway, again, you can't do better unless you know better, and those are the kind of things that I kind of geek out about anyway. But yeah, so just kind of, you should be able to talk to somebody and get a pretty good feel for like how much of a process they have down, how comfortable they are with their process. Ask them how long their milk lasts, and if you do buy milk from them and it's going bad after 5 days, don't buy it again. Your raw milk should last 2 weeks minimum. If it is done properly in a sanitary environment, the cow is healthy, your milk should last 2 to 3 weeks. Absolutely, no questions asked. I kind of periodically will keep back jars, you know, especially if I don't have a full jar from the milk in and I just have a partial jar. I'll put it kind of in the back of the fridge and let it sit for at least 2 weeks, and then I'll pull it out because I drink on milk as I'm doing things out in the barn. So I pull out those old jars just to kind of keep a track on how our milk is lasting and things like that. It should last 2 weeks minimum. But that's with keeping it in the back of the fridge, kind of unopened. The more you expose it to air, the more likely it is to pick up bacteria and things like that. Dana had asked about kind of a day in the life. This is just depressing to me to actually look at and talk through. There's not a whole lot of sitting on our butts, not doing much. But it's worth it. It's at least that's what I tell myself, that it's enjoyable nonetheless. I mean, what else would we be doing? But yeah, so it's, you know, we typically during the week we milk around 5 a.m. and then, you know, have work, school, get home. He's home usually 4:30. I get home usually around 5:30 or 6, and then it's get everybody fed, including the humans eventually, which eat after the critters, of course. You know, and bedtime and things like that, and then kind of the weekly stuff. And the way that we've split it out that has worked really well is I kind of handle more or less the what I call the maintenance stuff, the daily maintenance, the feeding, the milking, the things like that, and then he's the project guy. And there's not a project that exists that he can't make happen. But yeah, this pasture management as well, you know, that's a big one, and that's one that we're really trying to concentrate on this year, especially as we're kind of getting our feet on the ground, because we don't have just a ton of pasture. So he's clearing out some woods to try to make some shady grass areas and things like that. And so we'll be investing real heavily in rotating, doing kind of regenerative agriculture type practices and principles, and trying to use concentrated disturbance for the better, and then oversee where we need to and things like that. Excuse me. So that's kind of what I had on Dairy Cow 101. Do we have any questions before we pivot to like what you can actually do with your milk now that you've gone to all this heartache and discontent and fear and longing and all the things? Any questions before we?
Well, our biggest problem is our containers doesn't get a hold of it.
You know, I get that a lot, that when I say it should last 2 weeks, and they're like, no, it shouldn't, not if you're drinking it.
It doesn't at our house.
Yeah, it does. I think my kid polished off probably over a half a gallon just yesterday. Just being home, playing outside. I mean, he drinks water too, like, don't get me wrong, he's not only drinking milk, but, it doesn't last that long in our house either. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
It is the best milk our pets have ever had.
Yes, I love it. I love it.
They like it.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I wanted to really cover was like what you can do with it, because, and I understand with raw milk, especially when you're making that financial investment, it is terrifying to like be like, okay, I'm gonna get, you know, $36 worth of milk this week and try to make some cheese, and it may fail, and then it's 30, you know, so I get it. I totally get it. And so what I've tried to do is kind of collect like a few of our recipes, and I brought the books that we use, you know, and feel free too with producers. Sometimes we have milk that's a little bit older. You know, sometimes if I don't get milk moved, now this hasn't happened recently for many reasons, but you know, don't ever hesitate to reach out and be like, hey, do you have any older milk or any skimmed milk? Because sometimes I need butter for the house, but I don't have time to make mozzarella or, you know, any of the other things. So I may have, you know, some skimmed milk that we would let go pretty cheaply as well, if you're wanting to just experiment and try new things. But so these are kind of the things that we feel like are your best bang for buck, effort to awesome, however you want to say it. Cream cheese, sour cream, yogurt is a big one, kefir, cottage and ricotta cheese. I put those together because somehow my cottage cheese always comes out tasting very similar to my ricotta cheese. And I typically use it all the same anyway, so it's just kind of whatever level of tang I want that day. Ice cream is a good one, coffee creamer. If you are somebody who likes like the fancy flavored coffee creamers, I have the recipe for you. We brought some that y'all can try. It is so good. And everybody wants to make butter, and I get it. I want to make butter. I actually had to buy butter not long ago. And it hurt my heart. I was like, because we needed to do a lot of baking, and I think I only had like 2 sticks in the freezer that we had done. And so butter is so hard. It's really not hard. I say it's hard, but it takes such a volume of cream to actually make an amount of butter that's worth, you know, especially if you do a lot of baking. You know, if you're just buttering toast or, you know, things like that, yeah, you can make enough from the cream off your milk to make a week's worth of butter. But if you're doing any serious butter consuming, or if you have kids like mine that'll just take a stick of butter and just gnaw down on it, you probably won't be able to keep up without a cow. And we have cows, and we still can't, or I still can't keep up with the butter half the time. So, bang for buck, effort to awesome. My opinion is butter's not it. Definitely make it, try it. It's fun, kids love it, but don't be like, oh, I have to make butter every single week, and you know, here's this milk that I'm getting. All these like, just buy it from the store. It's not the end of the world. So equipment for these soft cheeses, and that's what I'm going to go over today. These soft cheeses, it's really very simple. And if you just have one book to get, I would recommend this one right here. It's called The Home Creamery. And I don't have nearly as many books on doing dairy things as I would like. I'm kind of a book hoarder, and I've had to like rein it back, but this book is really, really, really good, and it's got, you know, just very simple recipes, easy to access ingredients. It uses a lot of cultured buttermilk. The Kalana that Dana carries here in the store, I use that. I don't culture my own buttermilk hardly ever anymore. I just keep a jug of the cultured buttermilk from Kalana, and it does really, really well. This book is really good. This goes over all the sour creams, cream cheeses, ricotta, cottage cheese, things like that. So I brought a bunch of different books for y'all to just kind of look through and see if it's something that you think that you would like. But really, you just need a big stainless pot, quality milk or cream, and you can do this with store-bought milk. You can take just the non-ultra pasteurized, the milk you can get here at Dana's, the Kalana, or milk that you order through Azure, or I don't really know of anywhere else that you could get it locally. Maybe Fiesta would carry Kalana or something like that. Anyway, you can use that with pretty good success making cheese. Now you may have to buy your heavy cream separately. The beauty of raw milk is that it has the heavy cream and the regular milk kind of all encompassed in that one jar. But you can do this with non-ultra pasteurized milk as well. And then cultures, that's another rabbit hole that's really easy to go down. You can go on, there's several websites, Cultures for Health, New England Cheese Making Company is a really good one. Who else? There's a ton of random, there's a ton of random cultures that you can buy off Amazon or Etsy or things like that. But really, for the most part, on these soft cheeses, you can use yogurt, you can use cultured buttermilk, you can use kefir. All three of those contain the necessary strains of bacteria to do whatever it is that you're trying to do. Because when you make cheese, that's what you're doing, right? You're basically curdling the milk so that it forms a solid, and then you're culturing or inoculating it with whatever strains of bacteria you want, or allowing the beneficial bacteria that's in raw milk to kind of take over and do its thing. That's really all it is. And then clabber is one that I'm starting to play with a lot more, and I think it's really, really cool. So basically, if you take raw milk and you leave it out on the counter, it doesn't go bad. It clabbers, and it basically solidifies. It goes through this process of becoming cheese, essentially. And you can catch it at a certain point. It's basically like a sourdough starter. You can refresh your clabber and feed it every day with some fresh milk and let it thicken and stuff. But you can make, that's how cheese making of hard cheeses even got started, was they used the naturally occurring cultures. They didn't have access to freeze-dried cultures that were, packaged in a thing. They used clabber that had all the naturally occurring strains of bacteria, and then the way that they made these different cheeses was through manipulating the environment. Whether it was through temperature, whether it's through sealing it in wax, whether it's through air drying, inoculating, any number of things. But that was basically the basis of pre-modern day cheese making, was clabber, and being able to use that to do those things. So anyway, I think clabber's cool. I've only just scratched the surface on it. You can do so much with just vinegar and lemon juice. A thermometer. I will say a thermometer is pretty, I would say that's a pretty necessary one for just starting out. You may be able to do it intuitively. I'm not a very intuitive person. I like numbers. I like kind of, here's what I need to do at this particular stage in the game, and here's this and that. Vinegar and lemon juice will curdle milk. It's really just that simple, between that and then cultured buttermilk. And these are kind of your optional things. Rennet is what forms like harder curds in a cheese. And there's a couple different types. There's animal rennet, which is basically, it's kind of morbid, but it's harvested from the stomach of young calves, and it basically curdles milk, because that's what happens in a calf's stomach, right? It curdles the milk into a solid. Or they have vegetable rennet that's available too. The vegetable rennet can be really difficult to work with. Like, it's much more concentrated, and it's just animal rennet is, if you're getting animal rennet from a good source, a trusted source, you know, I don't think there would be any ethical issues with that whatsoever. Calcium chloride is really helpful when you're working with store-bought milk instead of raw. It does help you get more curds per gallon, essentially. It helps, for whatever reason, pull that out of the milk. We really like using an Instapot for yogurt. Like, it is literally a press the button, set it, and forget it, and then 16 hours later you have yogurt. But I did try, for this meeting, I tried a different way to make yogurt that I'll go over as well, that was also super easy, but we love the Instapot. And then also optional is a cheese press, and that's basically how you get your hard cheeses, is they start out as curds in a pot, and then you press them, and you squeeze them, and you compress them, and you get all the moisture out. And so they can be as rudimentary as something that's homemade, or a very elaborate thing that you buy commercially. But so and this is probably, most of y'all know this, but when you get a jar of raw milk, this is what you will see. So there's your cream line, and in this jar, this was a super excellent jar. We don't get jars like this very often anymore, because Patty has her calf on her, so she saves the cream for her, which is a whole nother story. But so that's the cream line right there. That's basically where the heavy cream transitions to just the regular milk, and basically fats rise to the top, fat floats. And so it's, once the milk settles and the older milk gets, the more defined that line will be, because more fat has basically come to the surface. It is much easier to skim older milk. It is much easier to make butter with older milk. Like, when we go to make butter, I'm looking for the jars that are more than 5 days old, because it's just so much easier to skim it and get the cream off of it and deal with all that. But so essentially, this would be your heavy cream, kind of up top, and then you get your light cream kind of down below. This heavy cream, once it gets 3 or 4 days old, it's actually like a crust. You can actually almost turn your jar over sometimes and nothing will come out, because that fat has capped that milk. And then this is just regular milk. But even if you skimmed all the cream off, or as much as you could get, and you're left with this milk, it's still like 4% fat. It's still basically equivalent to grocery store milk, more or less. So butter, even though I said it's really bang for buck wise, it's not necessarily the best option. Everybody wants to make butter, and I say do it. Like, at least once in your life, make butter, because it is just so fun. You do want to let it sit out at room temperature until it gets to 56 to 60 degrees. I like to start kind of on the lower end of that at 56 degrees, because we're usually churning enough that it generates friction and heat, and so the temperature of our liquid will actually rise a little bit more than it would with a smaller amount. But you can also culture your butter, which is my preference as well, and that's basically you pour in some cultured buttermilk and you let it sit on the counter overnight or whatever, stick it back in the fridge, and then do this process. And that's basically inoculating your butter with all the beneficial bacteria, and that'll make it last longer sitting out on the counter, and it gives it more of that kind of tang, like tangy taste to it as well. And then you have cultured buttermilk when you get done making your butter that you can bake with and do all of those things. But so there's a lot of different ways you can make butter. My kid loves to shake it in a jar. He always gets tired before he actually makes butter. But you can literally just put that cream in a jar, it gets to the right temperature, and you can sit there and you can shake it. And you'll make butter eventually. You can...
KitchenAid.
Yeah, you can use your KitchenAid if you have a mixer with a whisk attachment. It works really well, but you better have a towel, like, cover that thing, because it will sling buttermilk everywhere. When that butter breaks, it makes a mess. So don't say I didn't warn you if you do it that way. Have it like and I'm talking a beach towel. I'm not talking like a hand towel. I'm talking like a beach towel. Like, cover that thing. We have it's a purpose-built butter churn. We put it on a 1 gallon jar. I think it came with like a
2.5.
2.5 gallon jar. we don't ever have that much cream to actually skim, so he modified it and put it on a 1 gallon jar, and it's got an electric motor on the top, and it works really, really well. But my favorite, honestly, for small batches and for what you would be dealing with just off of 1 jar or 2 jars, I like just a mason jar, either a quart or half gallon size, and an immersion blender. That is my favorite. It doesn't make a mess. It's quick, it's easy, it just kind of, it works. That's kind of my go-to. The important thing is don't ever fill your container over half full, because it will expand as it goes through this process. So you start churning and you keep going until it breaks, and it sounds very like kind of voodoo-ish, but once you do it once, you'll know what it means, and you'll think, I'm not making butter. So I always put this, these are the stages that you go through when you're making butter. You go through hope, then you have heavy whipping cream. You can stop right there, and you can add maple syrup. You can make it into sweetened heavy whipping cream, and it's delicious. You can put that in your coffee like that. Then you go to the what the heck is going on, and then there's despair because it's never going to happen, and then you start praying because it's like, this is never going to happen. I just wasted all this cream, and then eventually you get butter and buttermilk. So once it breaks, that's so that picture is kind of hard to see, but this is summer butter, by the way, that yellow. My butter is not that color right now, but those are the chunks of butter, and then that's the buttermilk in between, and so the butter will actually, and it'll start kind of globbing up on whatever you have mixing it as well. Then you just strain it. You can keep the buttermilk. You can choose to not keep the buttermilk. If you do keep the buttermilk, it's really good for baking, especially if it's cultured. And basically what you do is you just massage your butter and you work it back in. There's a million different ways. You can watch YouTube. I don't have to actually stand up here and tell y'all. That's probably superfluous. But I always do keep a bowl of ice water right next to me, and when that butter starts sticking, I just put it back in the ice water to just rest and chill, and then it won't stick to your hands or anything as badly. And you just go until you'll feel it. It gets just smooth and soft and workable, and there's no more buttermilk that's actually oozing out. The buttermilk is what will actually make it go rancid. That's why you try to squeeze as much of that out as possible. And then you can mold it into shapes. We have a silicone mold that makes the actual butter stick shapes. I do a lot of baking, and so I like having kind of the standardized measurements. You can mold it into bees or bears, or they make silicone molds for everything. You can put it in a big log. You can do anything you want with it. And then just preserve it. We vacuum seal ours and put it in the freezer when we actually have a surplus enough to have back. Yogurt is the other thing that we make the most. This is another one. I didn't get specific on the slide itself, because you can Google how to make yogurt, and there's a million different ways that will come up. The two that we have done that work really well, the one that we do pretty much every single week, and by we I mean he takes raw milk and just pours it in the Instant Pot, puts the yogurt from the week before in with it, and just lets it go. Doesn't pasteurize it, doesn't heat it to 180, and it's not thick like Greek yogurt, but the flavor we really, really like. And we brought some yogurt starter, some little jars of yogurt starter that's with that raw yogurt as well, if anybody wants to buy some of those. Wants to buy a jar, not buying the milk product. But the other way is you can actually, it essentially pasteurizes your milk. And there's two schools of thought. So people who are super pro raw milk are like, why would I pasteurize even for yogurt? Because we like the bacteria. That's why we drink raw milk, right? Well, if you're drinking raw milk, there's a very good chance that you're already getting all of those other bacteria with it. And so therefore it's not going to hurt you to just select for the yogurt bacteria, because that's essentially what you're doing is you're pasteurizing, and then you're selecting for the yogurt bacteria that you want with whatever culture you use. Is basically how that works. So I have some samples of yogurt that was not heated to 180, that was just the Instant Pot yogurt, and then I have some that were heated to 180 degrees, and then literally pour that milk and yogurt mixture into jars, put them in a cooler, fill it up to kind of where the neck of the jar is with hot water, and just let it incubate overnight in the cooler. Literally all you have to do to make yogurt. You don't have to have any specialized equipment. All you gotta have is some jars, some yogurt, and some milk, and hot water, and a cooler. So most people have most of that. I was surprised at how easy that was, honestly, and it turned out really, really well. It was a little bit of a thicker, and I did use a freeze-dried culture on that instead of, you can get a carton of yogurt from the store and use that to make your yogurt. It's super simple. Yogurt bang for buck wise, compared to what you're gonna get from the store, it's one of those that's really, really worth it.
Question.
Yes.
How do you know how many billions of bacteria are in what you make?
We don't.
Okay.
You know, we can,
You can culture it.
yeah, you could culture it if you had a lab. That's kind of on our wish list one day, is where we really want an on-farm lab so that I can like have instant results for cultures and things like that. But basically, you know, the bigger companies that sell yogurt and things, most of the time they have it printed on the container, how many active bacteria and things like that. And if you're using that as your starter culture, I think it's a pretty good bet that you could extrapolate that on forward.
Can you use the kefir that put into the yogurt?
Yes, yes. Yeah, it's, the thing about raw dairy that I have found is that you have to kind of disconnect your brain from what you know from the grocery store, because it typically does come out a very different texture and a different flavor. Like, to me, it's usually more complex of a flavor, and it can be a little bit more sour, or, you know, it just depending on how long you culture it for, things like that. But it will not taste necessarily like what you go and buy, especially with like cream cheese, for example, because they typically put thickeners in it and emulsifiers and things to make it smooth and creamy and spreadable and things like that. So one of the things that you can do is you can actually play with, you can take your yogurt and you can put it in cheesecloth. If it's too loose and sloppy, just put it in cheesecloth, hang it up to strain, and it'll drain a lot of that liquid out. And if you leave it up long enough, it'll actually make what's called yogurt cheese. And it's basically like a, I don't know what consistency to, like, it's like a cream cheese
Like
kind of,
Feta.
yeah, like feta cheese, cream cheese type, and you can literally just spread it on crackers, and it was yogurt that was just hung up to strain. So that's where the finesse comes in, and just knowing what you like and what your family likes, being able to adjust. Well, I need to add some whey back to this because it's too dry, or I need to, like, I add yogurt to my cottage cheese when I make that to get a little bit of a creamier texture. So it really is, it's not a very scientific answer, and I'm sorry. Like, a lot of it is just kind of playing around with textures, and you can use the immersion blender, you can put it in the food processor if you like it creamier, or just whatever you like for your family. Did that kind of answer your question? Cream cheese is another one. I'll kind of skip over these because I've been yakking for a very long time now. Cream cheese is another one that I love. I brought some cream cheese and I made some little bagels for y'all to try. We have regular cream cheese and strawberry cream cheese, and they're pretty good. Super simple ingredients you have at home. Same thing with sour cream. This is a good learning moment. So I had sour cream that I had made, and basically all you do is you put all that together, you bring it up to 68 to 70 degrees, and then you can set it on the counter and forget it. Or my advice, don't forget it, because back in the winter time, I was culturing for 24 hours to get it to that sour level that I wanted. So I put it on yesterday to bring tonight, not thinking about the fact that the house is probably 15 degrees warmer right now than it was this winter when I cultured it. And it was definitely on its way to cheese when I tried it before we left. So the sour cream, I don't have anything to show you to sample. But that's the beauty of raw dairy, is it's a living product. Essentially, you're working with a living product, and it's basically figuring out, okay, well, at what point do I stall the process by putting it in the refrigerator? Because that's essentially what you're doing, is you're letting it get to where you want it, and then you're stopping it right there by getting it cold. Ricotta is another one that's really easy, and cottage cheese is a very similar process. But the cottage cheese recipes that I use do call for rennet, and that's an ingredient that not many people just have sitting around in their refrigerator. They come out pretty similar, actually, to me. The ricotta has more liquid with it, obviously, and I brought some ricotta and some of the quote-unquote cottage cheese to try. The cottage cheese does not taste like store-bought cottage cheese at all. I like it better because I'm not a cottage cheese fan from the store. This comes out with like a drier texture to the curds. It's almost a little bit more like a soupy crispy squeaky cheese, if that makes sense, which I love. Put some jam on top of that, or some fruit, or just whatever. We'll drizzle maple syrup, and that's breakfast. Like, it's good. So I brought a lot of things to try. If you don't like them, just think about it in terms of, well, I can adjust flavors if I did want to try making this at home. So that's really kind of what we had. Keep in touch. We want to hear from y'all. This is the farm kind of information. We're on Facebook and Instagram. That's probably the best way. And then our phone numbers. Lots of people in here have our phone numbers. Dana has our phone numbers and can get in touch with us. We do have, kind of raw milk. We have regularly come in here for his temple, and then kind of some limited weekend pickup when I'm not hoarding milk. Lately, I've been kind of hoarding milk on the weekends to try to do some things. We're both federal employees, and so there's been a lot of kind of uncertainty with what the future holds as far as that goes, and trying to gear up and maybe seize the opportunity to do something a little bit different. So I will make a shameless plug. There is a good chance that I will potentially, don't quote me on this, but we're weighing the options of me quitting the 9 to 5 and staying home. And doing that would enable me to homeschool my son, but I would still have to have some income coming in, but it would give me a chance to be home. And so if these dairy products are things that you might like to potentially purchase in the future, I mentioned that herd share that we set up, because I can't just sell y'all milk products. Like, the bill's very specific about milk for pet consumption. But we do still have the herd share set up, and so for a $20 buy-in fee to the herd share, you can become a member, and then as a member, you can then purchase these value-added items. So I don't know what that looks like yet, but if there's interest, please let me know, because that's definitely, we're trying to dip some toes in the water at this point and see what's there. So what other questions can I answer now that there's Patty being special. They're not spoiled a bit. But we do also, we don't have a ton of chickens, but in times of surplus, we do have eggs. Eventually, we hope to be raising some heritage breeds of meat birds for sale that taste super different from the Cornish cross that you're used to getting, or much kind of darker meat, richer broth, things like that. He is the bee man, and we're looking at expanding hives like exponentially this year, and having a lot more honey available to sell. It's single hive, small batch. Everything is made right there on the farm. What else?
That's about it.
Yeah, anything that's surplus, we'll have probably a lot of surplus veg
Like
from the
sourdough.
garden. Yeah, I do bake, so that's something else that I'm looking at. I'm not, by any stretch of the imagination, a scratch bake house or nourished farmstead or anything like that. Not yet anyway, I got a lot more practice, but it's something that I do enjoy, so that's a potential as well. Yes.
I saw something up there about classes.
Yes, so that's something that I am super, honestly, and I should have started with this, I feel almost silly standing up here talking to you all, acting like I actually know what I'm talking about, because I really feel like I don't know what I'm talking about. But we love people who love to learn, and people who want to learn to do the things. And one of the things that I want so desperately for the future is to be able to offer classes. And I don't know if that'll be up at the farm, because it is kind of a drive, or if we like hoodoo Dana into having an evening class here, kind of things like that. But things like home dairy, actually, sitting down in the kitchen and doing these things and making these things. And I think we could do that in like a 3 or 4 hour kind of class. We could cover a lot of different dairy products.
You could bring Paula in here.
Yeah, no, she would love that. She'd leave you some decorations too, let me tell you. Pressure canning is one that a lot of people have interest in. Pressure canning and water bathing, things like that. That's something that we do a lot of on the farm. Beekeeping, he could do a beekeeping seminar. So that's something that we really, it's not imminent. I've got too many other things occupying the brain space, but that's something, and not just us standing up here lecturing about these things too, but if we can find people who know more about things than we do, I would love to do that as well. But the classes, I took a lot of classes from Erin Smith in Delhi, kind of when we were still living in the suburbs, and she was doing some pretty regular classes with sourdough and pressure canning and fermenting things and all of that stuff. And I got so much out of that, not just from the classes and being able to see the skills in action, but also meeting people and making these connections with community and all of that stuff. So, anyway, that's my shameless plug for the farm. Trying to do a little bit of self-promotion there too.
How do you do the herd share, the buy into the herd share, how does that work?
Yep, so we have contracts that were written up by those attorneys, and so, I should have had some business cards or something made up. I'll give you my information, but basically, once we kind of get a list together of the things that people actually like, so please be very honest with your feedback tonight. I mean it, like the good, the bad, the ugly. If you don't like it, I wanna know, and I wanna know why, and kind of like get kind of a good consensus, cause we know what we like, but we don't know what other people like. But basically it's a contract and it's a $20 buy-in. So for $20 you would own a piece of Paula and Patty, and then as a part owner, there's an addendum to that contract that basically goes over the pricing for the value-added products, that like the yogurts and the ice creams and the, stuff like that we could potentially offer. So it's basically, you sign the contract once, and then I'm not sure what it's gonna look like. I had kind of played around with trying to offer through the Buyers Club. I don't know if y'all are Buyers Club members here. And maybe try to do it like once every 2 weeks for herd share members, like somehow you put your order in then, and then it would be with your Buyers Club order. I don't know what that looks like yet, to be completely honest. We do have the contractual framework in place. It's just figuring out the delivery and how often and things like that. Because right now with work, I don't have quite the brain space to be able to do too much, but if that changes, hopefully, we'll be reevaluating some things.
So that's the comp, fine.
Yeah. Hopefully within the next 3 months. What other questions can I answer? Y'all hungry? I'll leave the books out. Again, if I had to pick just one, this one is really, it's probably the one that I reach for the most. And then I brought this one for Dana to look at, because Dana's been making caramel sauce with whey for making things.
It's good.
And there's so much that you can do with whey, and I barely even cracked the cover of this. Yeah, I know, right? We actually end up using ours for fertilizer for the garden a lot. We'll either give it to the chickens, give it to the pigs, or just pour it on the garden, and it's a great source of calcium. Our tomatoes are so happy. I mean, no judgment here. I mean, I see nothing wrong with that. Yeah, well, we got a bunch of stuff to try. Erin, it's gonna be a little bit of a free-for-all. I'm not sure the best way.
What you need me to do?
Prepare your palate.
Okay. Any particular?
I know that's huge.
Yeah, Father God.
It's a big decision.
That's what she said. Yeah, totally.
I honestly don't know the answer to that. Absolutely, it is our pleasure. And we do have, if anybody wants yogurt starters, we do have yogurt starters for sale. And then I do have a